Growing up, I had watched a lot of Spider-Man related media, dating all the way back to I can remember when I was a kid watching the old 60s show. But none of the Spider-Man medias, not even the 90s show, captured my attention like Spectacular Spider-Man did. Probably because at the time it was still coming out while I was really young, and I was trying to catch it on TV all of the time, especially after elementary school. And man, I did not realize just how spoiled I was when it came to watching a Spider-Man show. That not only would I be seeing one of the best Spider-Man shows to ever do it, but I would get the opportunity to watch it as it was originally airing, even if my memory on that is a little fuzzy as I've gotten older. I think a majority of people online know at this point that Spectacular Spider-Man is the quintessential high school Spider-Man story, and that this show did an impeccable job. It wasn't just watchable for kids, but adults and teenagers as well. It's what made it so great. And so I just want to take a look back at it because genuinely the last time I watched this show in full was over 6 years ago. And of course, what other way to kick off this sort of retrospective than with the first episode of the first season? The choice to put Spider-Man back in high school for Spectacular Spider-Man, this show specifically, especially coming hot off the heels of the 90s Spider-Man show in which we saw Peter spend a majority of his time in college, was actually a pretty novel idea in animation at the time, unlike how we see Spider-Man today, where a majority of him is spent in high school. Which is funny because Spider-Man didn't spend a whole lot of time in high school in the comics. It was actually a pretty quick jump from him being Spider-Man in high school to being Spider-Man in college. So this show's decision to take him back to a high school setting felt refreshing at the time. I really love the opening scene of this episode because it establishes very well just how Spider-Man is as a character. His quips are on point. He is out there pretty much trouncing on villains and making fun of them as he goes. But then we get the flip side of Peter Parker. We almost immediately see at the beginning of the episode that Aunt May is struggling with money, and Peter is feeling that responsibility, especially with Uncle Ben no longer being alive. This show was not like a majority of kids' shows. It wasn't really afraid to tackle a wide variety of topics, as well as hard-hitting topics. I know I like to say that a lot, especially about a lot of the cartoons that I cover that were made for kids, but Spectacular Spider-Man was different. In my opinion, it was not to the level of Static Shock, but it was definitely more on par with something like X-Men Evolution when it came to trying to present lessons to children in easily understandable ways. That's part of the reason I love this show so very much. Now, when Peter does arrive on his first day in high school, he is Spider-Man. He's excited to the fact that he probably no longer has to get bullied, and that he's had so many changes over this summer, as he's only recently become Spider-Man, that pretty much Peter feels like he's on cloud nine and he can tackle anything. And so what does he do first day on campus of this new year of high school? He shoots for the fences and tries to go get himself a cheerleader as a girlfriend. Because Peter is just so intelligent.
Is he?
I think he is. Are you damaged?
He did.
Why in the world do you think I'd ever go out with Midtown High's champion geek?
Yeah, Peter is pretty much shot out of luck in this scene, but another thing that I found pretty nice was that it's kind of nuanced with the football players and the jocks, so to say. Of course, Flash Thompson is still a dick and just bullies Peter, but we see that Rand is extremely cool with Peter, like, has pretty much no issues with him. But what does bother me is Rand does just kind of stand by and let all of that happen to Peter, which to me is kind of annoying. But I think something nice that this show does is for every L, or multiple L's in this case, that Peter takes, he always gets some sort of small and or major W that really does just help propel his character forward. For example, he just landed himself an internship at ESU's lab, which is something that he thinks is amazing and could hopefully lead to getting some form of payment. It's also worth noting that he's telling this to his best friend Harry Osborn and eventually to Harry's father, that being Norman Osborn, who is kind of chastising Harry for not getting the same opportunity or being as smart as Peter. And while all of this is going on, Norman gets kidnapped by a dude in a black and red wingsuit. And who we would later come to find out is the Vulture. Now, Vulture is honestly such a great villain to have for a first Spider-Man outing. I think he's perfect in that regard. It also sets up Norman Osborn and his absolutely corrupt and horrific business practices extremely well from the first episode. We see the entire reason Adrian Toomes is upset and angry with Norman Osborn is because Osborn simply won't apologize for stealing his tech. This whole issue stems from the fact that Norman Osborn refuses to apologize about anything. We also get to meet characters like Dr. Otto Octavius. This show did an amazing job of building up a world that felt realistic, as we'd see multiple characters recur, and even just random characters begin to have bigger and bigger roles as the season went on. And just to add on to all of that amazing writing that's already being done, is that this show just does a whole ton of callbacks. For example, this swinging scene might look a little familiar, much like the first ever cover of Spider-Man's first ever comic. This show is just chock full of references and extreme respect to the characters and source material, while also updating and changing some things to make it fresh and unique. For example, Vulture is all based on technology, and honestly, I loved the look he had in this show. It felt like a proper modernization of Spider-Man, up there with The Amazing Spider-Man in my opinion, when it comes to modernization of the character. I'm talking about the first Amazing Spider-Man, by the way. And just when Peter's life was maybe going a little too well, he is informed by Edward Brock Jr., that being one of Peter's best friends, they took the relationship of Eddie and Peter from Ultimates Comics and put it into this show, so they're more like brothers in this show, and good friends. Back on topic though, Peter pretty much finds out his internship is unpaid, and he still needs to find ways to make money for his Aunt May. And so, by chance, he ends up seeing the Daily Bugle needs photos of Spider-Man, and so he's gonna try and cash in on this. But J. Jonah Jameson isn't having it at all.
This wailing infant out of my face, out of my city room, out of my town!
And I'll be honest, that has to be my second favorite J. Jonah Jameson performance ever, behind, of course, everybody knows the GOAT, J.K. Simmons. Now, when Peter did go back to try and retrieve his shoes, yes, he left his shoes at Harry's house, he ends up running into Vulture again, in which he sees Vulture trying to attack Norman Osborn. But it's not just Vulture that is going to give Peter problems tonight. Instead, he also ends up running into a mercenary group who are working for somebody called the Big Man. You see the start to the overarching story for this first season that's being set up. Now, another thing that's just spectacular, pun intended, about this show is the combat and the way at which it looks. The show is not the most visually pleasing when the people are in static, like standstill photos, but in motion, the show looks amazing. And so they went out of their way to sacrifice proper design in standing still for fluid motion. And in all honesty, you kind of have to choose one or the other when making a serialized cartoon like this. Now, this episode goes, as you might assume, with Spider-Man being able to finally take care of Vulture and defeat his first true supervillain that he's ever faced, considering he's basically been facing low-level crooks this entire summer. This is the first major villain he's ever fought, and he leaves him in a traditional Spider-Man sense. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because Peter is now coming home past midnight, and Aunt May just isn't having it anymore. And so, even though Peter wins, he also loses once again slightly because he now has a 10 p.m. curfew.
Okay, nothing went as planned today. Understatement of the year. But I'm still Spider-Man and still undefeated. And I still have this amazing person watching out for me. Tell me there's something better. Go ahead. Try.
It's a kind of bittersweet ending to this first episode, but I think it characterizes Spider-Man well, and overall, it might be one of my favorite first episodes to a TV show ever. And it leads nicely into the very next episode. This show is extremely serialized despite having some episodic elements to it, and I think that's part of what makes this show so great. In the next episode, Peter does extraordinarily well on a high school test, whereas Liz Allen, one of the cheerleaders and girlfriend to Flash, ends up getting another D on her tests, meaning she desperately needs help when it comes to doing schoolwork. And so the teacher decides to assign Peter Parker to be her tutor, because why not? In my entire years of high school, this never happened. like, ever. But this is a kids' TV show, and so Peter is enthusiastically trying to teach Liz about biology, but she is less than interested and doesn't really care at all. So when Peter notices that there is a guy causing trouble and who might have just mugged a coffee shop that he's at while he's trying to teach Liz, Peter immediately ditches Liz and goes after the mugger.
Look, this tutoring thing is something you need, not me, so when you're ready to learn, let me know.
Now, inadvertently, I think Liz was extremely shocked that puny Parker just pretty much blew her off. But Spider-Man wasn't really thinking much like that. Instead, he was more focused on dealing with the dude who has electrical powers, of which he just insults the entire fight. Like, Peter was just holding no holds bars with the quips, all while he's also trying to convince his Aunt May that he's on his way home, only for him to find out the next day that that poor guy was Max Dillon, a person Peter has met before and a man who's been in a horrific accident, leaving him with those powers.
I just talked to Eddie. There was an accident at the lab.
Max's life is trashed, and not only don't I recognize him, I attack him. Not sure if I could have helped, but at least I could have tried.
Max Dillon was an electrical technician that would often help out around ESU's lab, especially when it came to dealing with any sort of malfunctions or anything that needed fixed for Kurt Connors. And unfortunately, while he was trying to fix one of the things, not only did he leave it on, but he dropped a screwdriver on it. That was really dumb on his part, but regardless, he ended up getting shocked by a bunch of electric eels and mixed that with the electricity. He has essentially turned himself into a constant biological electric eel, basically. That's kind of how the show explains it. Don't think about it too hard. But Eddie Brock was fairly close friends with Max Dillon, but Max is extremely frustrated. He can't live a normal life. He can't watch TV when he wants to. He can't touch anything that involves electricity without him blowing them up. And all he wants to do is go home and just live. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen at all, and Max is just going further and further off the deep end, wanting to have a cure for his disease. And so that was just a little aside on Max. Peter, after feeling bad for ditching Liz, decides to invite her to the ESU lab in the hopes that she could actually learn something this time around. Trying to do a different style of learning, being more showing, less telling. And it's actually seemingly getting through to Liz, but unfortunately, Max Dillon has come in search of a cure from the Connors family, and he's not leaving without it, even willing to hold hostages in order to get this cure. Now, we get to see a lot of Eddie Brock in this show, but he's never always been the smartest, but he has been one of the toughest, as he often does throw himself at any sort of issues or problems in order to try and save the day, while Peter slinks off and retreats. Of course, he's only going so he can go swap over to his other costume and be Spider-Man. And this time when Peter confronts Max, he genuinely tries to get through to him and apologize for what he had said last time.
Look, I messed up before, but now I really want to help.
Yeah, that didn't work out almost at all. Max Dillon just pretty much is done with Spider-Man and done with anybody who's not going to just give him the cure immediately. Now, it's not like the Connors weren't working on a cure, they were, but I personally feel as though Max Dillon was having a psychological break, and in this situation, who wouldn't? And Peter, of course, is once again putting himself on the line at the ripe age of 16, all in order to try and save his friends from what seems to be an ever-growing amount of supervillains. All while still trying to respect Aunt May's 10 p.m. curfew, of which he keeps taking advantage of, and Aunt May makes that pretty clear on the phone that she's upset with him for it. Now, of course, Spider-Man is able to neutralize Electro, but at the end of the day, he still kind of loses. He has continually throughout this episode tried to get photos for the Daily Bugle, and he's failed at that, and he completely failed to get through to Liz, not only when it came to school, but also when it came to just making a new friend, as Liz ultimately folds to peer pressure and decides to choose to stay with the group that she runs in rather than breaking clique. Yet, despite all that, Peter just doesn't hold it against her, and I think that's pretty nice.
No big. I reached out. She knocked my hand away. You can't control everything. Trick is to never stop trying.
This Peter seems to be a lot less vindictive and honestly just a lot less mean than his comic book counterpart was at this time of inception. I feel like this Peter is extremely well adjusted despite a lot of the trials and tribulations he faces. One of the best things I love about this show is it's very give and take. It's like one step forward, two steps back for Peter in his life. We'll at least get to see him catch a decent amount of W's along with all of the L's he catches, which is something that I truly feel the comics, outside of the Ultimate Comics Spider-Man run, which has been one of my favorites to read recently. If you haven't been reading it, please go read it. He hasn't really been catching a lot of W's in the comics, and it's kind of sucky. So it's nice when I get to go back and really watch a show that I feel like balanced it extremely well. I love this show, and I think that's fairly clear by the way I talk about it. This show has been requested for me to talk about more for a long time, especially as my audience has grown. Shout out 22,000 subscribers. You guys are amazing. So I really just wanted to slot this in for the time span in which I used to do Iron Man Armored Adventures videos, since I'm kind of ran out of things to talk about with that show. I feel like I covered everything I wanted to. I might return in future, but for right now, Spectacular Spider-Man will be taking up that slot. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you guys for watching. I truly appreciate it. You know, if you want to like the video, please leave a like. It helps out the channel a lot. If you dislike the video, please dislike, and then let me know down below why you don't like the video, as it helps me to create better content. If you want to subscribe, it's free and you can always unsubscribe later. As well, I do run a Patreon in which you can help out this channel and help get more videos made on a more consistent basis. As well, I do offer a few perks, and it only starts at $1 a month. You can join the Discord, in which you can talk to me and other people who enjoy this channel and other things similar in the Marvel or DC universe. As well, if you're in the $5 tier or above, you get shouted out at the end of the video, just like these wonderful people right here. So, without further ado, shout out to eSerbert13, shout out to Gabriel Lafonte, shout out to Transgers1, shout out to VideoGamer75, shout out to GoldenBoy420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb27. You guys are so amazing, and I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.